All right, welcome back for our next video for English 123, week 5. This is, I'd say, our second lecture video. The other was the overview, but this is our first actual lecture video for the week. So we're in the composition stage. We're going into drafting. As we said, we have moved from pre-writing with research, working on thesis statements, working on outline, working on proposal. So now we're going right into drafting. Um, I gave you some instructions on that initial overview that I think are going to be useful for you. As I said, I certainly hope you take heed to that. But again, it's just one way of doing this. It certainly is up to you. And that's really what this class is about, is finding your particular niche in the writing process, what works for you, that's most successful for you. And the key thing is to know that, okay, I want to use this particular strategy or this particular method that I've learned, but I'm going to alter it to fit me. That works, okay? Use tools to help you succeed in your academic pursuit, right? So as you're learning different tools in your different classes, acquire them and then adapt them to your best strengths and your particular learning style and your particular temperament, okay? So what I provided in that, you may take some, you may take all, you may take none, but hopefully you're using something. So hopefully you have a method. I've tried in my own attempts to just write essays from scratch. I'm going to write an essay. Um, no outline, no notes. I have my sources and I'm just going to write it. It didn't work. So I had to begin to think of, okay, I want to use that tool, I want to use that method that Professor so-and-so was talking about. I like that. I want to pick up those different tricks, if you want to call it that. So again, hopefully these tricks work for you, and you come through this semester, this session with a quality research paper behind you, and you're prepared for whatever courses may come up in the future. So this particular video is going to talk about essay essentials. So we're going to talk about the whole paper, the structure of the paper, the elements of the paper, and I hopefully want to keep this video within a half an hour. There's going to be one more. It's very video intensive for this particular week, but there's no reading assignments for this week, so it might kind of balance out for you. But anyway, so if you see in the course activities, or I think I might have it on the left hand section just under syllabus. If you click on that, it's going to be a PowerPoint document. It's going to have a PowerPoint presentation on essay essentials that I want you to follow along for this particular video. So we're going to be looking at essay essentials and really how your essay should hopefully take shape and function in this particular course for this paper as we work through. And this will apply to the next the next 2 weeks, for draft 1, draft 2, and draft 3. And this is for you to keep. This is for you to take and to use for any other papers you may have. But if you approach your paper in this class through this particular PowerPoint, I think you're going to produce a quality research paper that's going to be very readable, very understandable, and very articulate, I would hope. But yes, so essay essentials and the PowerPoint. So if you click on the second slide after the first title slide, essay introduction. So typically for an essay, you have an introduction, you have body paragraphs, and you have a conclusion. If you've learned that in any of your prior writing classes, whether in high school or maybe English 113, 5-paragraph essay is the basic standard format. Well, it really doesn't change in this class. It's just a 20-paragraph essay, or however many paragraphs you're going to have. It's just the same format. It's just more paragraphs, more content. So the rules don't really change. It just becomes um, more subtle, and there's more transitions, and there's more technique in it than you would for just a regular 5-paragraph essay. But you could write a very, very well-written 5-paragraph essay off of something like this. So anyway, the essay introduction. What is the introduction? What's its purpose? What does it do? How does it function within the essay? Why do we need it? Well, we need it because it is literally introducing the topic. It's introducing the subject matter to the reader. We can't necessarily assume that the reader automatically knows all the background to your paper. If that were the case, there would be no introduction. It would just be your thesis statement. This essay will argue ... by demonstrating ... because ... So there would be no introduction, and then right into your paragraphs, and there you go. But unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, that's not the case. Fortunately, we do need an introduction so that our readers will know and understand the context and the background, and then you set the stage. You frame in or crop in your topic and argument to specifically hone in on the reader. Okay, you're helping the reader focus in on what you're wanting to argue. Okay, so the introduction should orient the reader to the context and the background of the argument made in the essay. Okay, so the argument, the thesis statement. So the introduction should orient the reader. It should position the reader. It should bring the reader's attention and focus on the context and background. So context would be the surrounding contemporary issues for that topic, and the background would be everything historically behind that. Now, of course, we can't go back to the beginning on some of these topics. Some topics, they go back decades, they go back centuries. Some of them are just part of the human condition. They go back to Adam and Eve. So it's not an exhaustive historical background, but there should be some. So inevitably, there is a historical background for really any one of your topics. Tax law, women's rights, animal rights, issues with child care, issues with what's some of the others? There's many topics in this course, so I'm just throwing out some of them. So there's this historical background behind all of those topics. Issues on education, paying for education, the cost of education, the cost of just living in general. So all these things have social, historical backgrounds that go back decades and centuries. So it is necessary, there is value, and there's need to help the reader understand, because their understanding may be limited, and also their understanding may be out of focus from what you're wanting to say. If you provide them a background, historically and a context, then you're kind of zeroing in. You're focusing them in and helping them not get distracted by peripheral, oh, what about this? Or what about that? They don't need to do that, and they're not distracted by that because you've already brought them in to that particular, scope of what you're wanting to say. And if something falls outside of that scope, it does not pertain to your research paper. It's only within the scope. And that's what the introduction is really supposed to do. So on to the next point. It should enable the reader to metaphorically shake hands with the topic and the argument. So if you meet someone, you shake hands with them typically. Okay, you shake hands, and you're becoming acquainted with that person. Nice to meet you. I have not met you. So you, the writer, are introducing your topic to the reader. So, hey, reader, I want you to meet my topic and my subject and my argument. Subject and argument, I want you to meet the reader. I know that might sound a bit elementary, but that's literally what's happening. So then the introduction should have a smooth progression from the slightly broad context of the topic to the narrowed thesis statement. And I think I mentioned this prior, where the introduction is really, it looks more like a triangle or pyramid, inverted pyramid, right? It's narrow at the bottom and broad at the top. And that, when I first learned that, it really, wow, okay, so that's a really good visual to think of when you're thinking of an introduction. The thesis statement is the very tip, the point of where you're headed. It's narrowing straight down to that thesis statement. All of this context and all of this information is narrowing straight down to that thesis statement, and that's, in my own personal preference, that's why I think the therefore really works well to cue a thesis statement. Therefore, because it becomes a conclusion of everything else that was said in that introduction. Everything that was said in that introduction build up, or should say build down to, or narrow down progressively to that thesis statement. And that thesis statement is just a logical conclusion. Okay, I understand. Therefore, yeah, obviously, logically, yes. Based on everything you just, I'm speaking as the reader, everything that you just said in this introduction, okay, that makes perfect sense. I understand that. It's logical. So that's what we want to. That's our goal in the introduction, to start broad, and not saying overly broad where it's just so unmanageable, but you have to kind of gauge the broadness of it. You don't want to go too far out in broadness, but you want to go just enough to where you're getting enough on either side, and behind and before, around, to where the reader can get an understanding and a bearing of where you're at with your particular topic and your argument. Okay, so think of an inverted triangle. That's really, I want your introduction, and this hopefully gets ingrained in your mind for other further essays. An inverted pyramid or triangle, narrowing down, thesis statement at the end of the introduction paragraph. That's really important. It should come at the end, and then nothing else after that for the introduction paragraph. It's the pinnacle. It's the main point of that introduction, the main point of the paper. And if there is anything after that, then it becomes diluted, and we don't want to dilute the thesis statement at all. We want the thesis statement to shine. That's the main, as I said, the main and most important part of your paper. Okay, next slide, slide 3. The claim. Of course, this is the thesis statement. We've spent a lot of time talking about this. The thesis statement is the central argument of the essay. Every detail, and this is important to remember, every detail in the essay must support and relate to the thesis statement. The thesis statement, as I said, is the compass. It tells you the direction where you're going, and everything else should line up with that thesis statement. Everything else. And if you think of the thesis statement as the hub of the wheel, all the spokes need to tie in to that hub. All the spokes around the wheel, and the wheel can turn. The wheel can roll. If you had a bicycle a wheel that didn't have a hub, the wheel would not have anything to support itself. It would crumble. So the hub of your paper, with all the spokes as the supporting material, that's what you want to look at. So you can look at another metaphor analogy is the essay is a wheel on a bike or a motorcycle. The spokes are the paragraphs. They are the main points that are supporting the hub. And so the hub, the thesis statement. Moving on. So to ensure an effective and well-organized essay, utilize a thesis statement that highlights the key points, the what, the how you'll be discussing in the paper. And then I give the examples of how you can begin a thesis statement, and we've kind of already covered that. So it's just more examples for you to follow. Let's move on. So slide 4, the topic sentence. So now we're moving into paragraphing. So now we've already established our introduction, background detail. We've already presented our thesis statement. Now we're moving into our paragraphing and are actually supporting now what we've argued and what we have introduced. So each paragraph has its own thesis statement. Each paragraph has a topic sentence. If you remember from foundational composition course or foundational English course, the topic sentence is the main point, the main specific point of that paragraph. Everything in the paragraph corresponds to the topic sentence, and every paragraph should have a topic sentence. So it's the what for that particular paragraph. The topic sentence is the what of the paragraph. So the topic sentence of your paragraph is the point that supports the thesis statement of the essay. So then every paragraph, as I said, just like the wheel and the spokes and the hub, every paragraph through the topic sentence points directly to and is in direct support of the thesis statement. So if you have a paragraph and it doesn't have a thesis statement that's not aligned with the, a topic sentence that's not aligned with the thesis statement, it's worth considering removing it or editing it considerably. You want that alignment. You want that cohesive line through your paper from thesis statement to conclusion, no digressions away from the thesis statement. So, and one other video lecture, we had the pillar with the ball. This is another example here, Greek columns where there, that's the Parthenon. So each of those columns are, in a sense, paragraphs that are holding up, that are supporting. So you can think of it that way. That's how paragraphs work. That's the topic sentence. It really is the substance of the paragraph. All right, moving on. Slide 5. So then you make a point in the paragraph, but you don't just leave it. You have to explain it. So you want to explain your point that you've made in the paragraph. You want to explain your topic sentence. What does it mean? What is that specific point of evidence that you found in your research, and how does it relate to the thesis statement? So what does it mean? Why is it significant? How does it relate to the thesis statement? I have who there, but it should be how. How does it relate to the thesis statement? So you want to kind of discuss those things. This is what this means. This is what this point means. This is the significance of this point, and this is how it relates to the thesis statement. And typically, that's going to involve some quotes. There's going to involve some source summary or paraphrasing in there as well, correlating that all together, which then leads us, yes, to incorporating supportive material. So the supportive material backs up the point you have made in the topic sentence of the paragraph. So you introduce the point as a topic sentence in the paragraph, you begin to explain it, you explicate it, and then you begin to bring in evidence to support it within that paragraph. So you utilize those credible sources to support the topic sentence as it supports the thesis statement on a supportive action going on in a paper. It's all woven together and intertwined. It's all very interconnected. We want to avoid just parallel lines in research paper. We want woven, integrated, intermingled material. So you want to avoid, when you're bringing in your quotations, you want to avoid abrupt quotations or examples. Now in the they say, I say, it gives you some examples of how to incorporate your research into your paragraphing. I strongly recommend using that resource. It's going to teach you how to integrate and transition and to bring in your quoted material. So avoid abrupt quotations, which I would call it's called a drop quote, where, and it does talk about this in the They Say textbook. It's as though the quote has just been dropped into the paper. There's no connective wording to it. It's just cut and pasted right into the paper, and it's very awkward. It doesn't appear to be related or connected or introduced. It's just there. So you want to utilize some kind of introductory phrase for your quotations. And that's to prepare the reader, to help them understand the connections that you're making, that you're attempting to make at least. So introductory phrases could be, for example, XYZ states. For example, according to XYZ. According to XYZ. So use these phrases. For example, according to, or Johnson says, Dr. So-and-so says, any of those, you want to refer to the author. But the they say text will give you some examples on how to tie that together. So there's a better seamless transition between what they are saying, your source, and what you are saying, and how you're explaining all that and how that all relates. Okay, moving on. Okay, so emphasizing significance, answering why. So when you've quoted someone, you need to answer why, or provide a justification as to why you've used that source. You want to emphasize why it's significant, why it's important. So you must address the why question within your paragraph after you've quoted that material. Not necessarily overtly, like this is important because, but you can say to a degree, this is significant. You can say this point is important because it points out. It doesn't necessarily have to be overt, but it can be. It can be. You can put your finger directly on the significance and say this is important because, or this quote, or Dr. X is their study is important because it relates to the overall argument in such and such a way. So you want to help the reader understand why you've chosen to use that particular source. It's important to emphasize the significance of your supportive material to help the reader follow your logic. You want them to understand, how these pieces in the puzzle fit together, because it can become very confusing very easily, very quickly. So don't leave it up to the reader to figure it out on their own. Don't just put a quote in the paragraph and then expect the reader to make all the connections on their own. You need to help the reader. You need to begin to make those connections for them, and anticipate or maybe even lead them through certain connections to help them come to the conclusion that you want them to. That's a real skill of rhetoric, is leading them along in a logical order to bring them to a conclusion that you're trying to help them make. And they can't do that unless they have some parameters, unless they have some guidance through that. Otherwise, it's too broad. There's too much room for them to get lost, or to begin to question. Okay, there's this quote. How does that relate? Why do I need to know this? So make sure you're helping the reader understand why the material is significant, noteworthy, important. Help the reader. Okay, moving on. Conclusions and transitions. So you want to utilize transitions when you move from one paragraph to the next. You want to have transitions and conclusions within your paragraphs, beginning and ending. That way the reader can see where a point begins and a point ends in your logic. So using phrases like therefore, hence, thus, clearly, those are cues that help the reader kind of follow along and track along with your logic and the direction of where you're headed in your particular argument. So providing a clear conclusion in your paragraph, ending your paragraph with a conclusion, will help the reader smoothly transition to the next point or next paragraph. Additionally, in addition to, moreover, furthermore. So using these, therefores and hence, there, thus, and clearly, using phrases like additionally, in addition to, moreover, furthermore, it helps the reader piece things together and make those connections and understand what's happening in your paper. All right, and lastly, final slide here, essay conclusion. The very conclusion, the ending paragraph, these can be very challenging at times to write, because it's what exactly do I do in a conclusion? Well, really the conclusion should be a mirror image of the thesis statement. The conclusion should reflect back to the thesis statement. So summarize the points that you've made in the essay and then emphasize how and why they support the thesis statement. So you want to summarize the main points and then emphasize how and why it supports the thesis statement. The conclusion should mirror the thesis statement, should reflect back to it. Some professors think that if you read the introduction and you read the conclusion, you should be able to grade just even on that. You should be able to deduce the content of the paragraphs, the body paragraphs, based on the introduction and the conclusion and how they mirror one another and how they relate to one another. And if there's any digression between those two, then you know there's something wrong in the paper. So be sure that the conclusion mirrors the thesis statement. And then lastly, avoid making any additional claims in the conclusion. You don't want to stir up another argument in the conclusion. It's trying to tie everything up, trying to tie it up nicely to where you can move on and maybe even move into an appeal to, in the conclusion you can appeal to the emotions, appeal to action, try to close the deal, if you will. But it's really just a summation of your points and really emphasizing how it's been supported and how it's the reasonable, logical conclusion to make based on that argument. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to end it there. I want to try to keep it not too long. So hopefully this helps. Hopefully this gives you some idea of the structure and what we're looking for. Read through the, pay close attention to the PowerPoint that we've just reviewed. Refer back to it for the next drafts that we're going to be having. And again, let me know if you need further clarification on it, if something maybe seems out of sort for you about the PowerPoint. Let me know, and I can hopefully clarify anything for you. But that's really what we're after, this type of an essay based on these types of key features. All right. So just to make you aware that the they say, I say is really going to help you with writing this type of an essay. So I'll maybe refer back to some of your reading, take down some notes, and that will really help you craft a really well written, easily readable, understandable, clearly supported research essay. All right, thank you. Going on to the next video, we're going to be talking about sentence composition. All right, thank you.